Prosperous families of Quraish. Bani Umayyah and Bani Makhzum were the two prominent families of the Quraysh favored by the stroke of luck. Walid bin al-Mughira, Abdul Uzza, Abu Lahab, Abu Uhayha bin Sa'id, who had a share of 30,000 dinars in the caravan of Abu Sufyan, and Ab bin Abdul Rabi'a al-Makhzum had made good fortunes. Abdullah bin Jaddan of Banu Taym was also one of the wealthiest persons of Makkah who used to drink water in a cup of gold and maintained a public kitchen for providing food to every poor and beggar. Abbas ibn Abdul Muttalib was another man abounding in riches who spent lavishly on the indigent and the needy and lent money at interest in Makkah. During his farewell pilgrimage when the Prophet abolished usurious transactions, he declared, "The first usury I abolish today is that of Abbas bin Abdul Muttalib." Makkah had also men rolling in riches whose well-furnished drawing rooms were the rendezvous of the elite of the Quraysh who rejoiced in the pleasures of wine, love and romance. The chiefs of the Quraysh usually had their sittings in front of the Kaaba in which prominent poets of pre-Islamic days, such as Labid, recited their poems. It was here that Abdul Muttalib used to have his gatherings and, as they say, his sons dared not take their seats around him until their father had arrived. Culture and arts. Industrial arts and crafts were looked down on by the Quraysh. They considered it beneath their dignity to have their hands in a handiwork. Manual occupations were regarded as occupation meant exclusively for the slaves or non-Arabs. Yet, notwithstanding this proclivity of the Quraysh, certain crafts were a dire necessity and were practiced by some of them. Qabhab bin al-Arat is reported to have been engaged in manufacturing swords. Constructional activities were also indispensable, but Iranian and Byzantine workmen were employed to do the job for the Quraysh. A few men in Makkah knew the art of reading and writing, but the Arabs, as whole, were ignorant of the way by which learning is imparted. The Quran also calls them ummi or an unlettered people. He it is who hath sent among the unlettered ones a messenger of their own. The people of Makkah were, however, not ignorant of the arts of civilization. Their refined taste, polish and culture excelled them in the whole of Arabia in the same was as the townsmen of any metropolis occupy a distinctive place in their country. The language spoken at Makkah was regarded as a model of unapproachable excellence. The Makkan dialect set the standard which the desert Bedouins as well as the Arabs of outlying areas strive to imitate. By virtue of their elegant expression and eloquence, the inhabitants of Makkah were considered to possess the finest tongue, uncorrupted by the grossness of the languages of non-Arabs. In their physical features, shapeliness and good looks, the people of Makkah were considered to be the best representatives of the Arabian race. They were also endowed with the virtues of courage and magnanimity of heart, acclaimed by the Arabs as al-Futu and al-Mura'a, which were the two oft-repeated themes of Arabian poetry. These traits of their character admirably describe their recklessness, which savored troth of a devil and a saint. The matters that attracted their attention most were genealogy, legends of Arabia, poetry, astrology and planetary mansions, ominous flight of the birds and a little of medication. As expert horsemen, they possessed an intimate knowledge of the horse and preserved the memory of the purest breed, and as dwellers of the desert they were well versed in the delicate art of physiognomy. Their therapy, based partly on their own experience and partly on the traditional methods handed down to them from their forefathers, consisted of branding, phlebotomy, removal of diseased limbs and use of certain herbs. Military powers. The Quraysh were by nature or nurture a peace-loving people, amiable in disposition, for, unlike all other peoples inside and outside the peninsula, their prosperity depended on the development of free trade, continual movement of caravans, improvement of marketing facilities in their own city and maintenance of conditions peaceful enough to encourage merchants and pilgrims to bend their steps to Makkah. They were sufficiently far-sighted to recognize that their mercantile business was their life. Trade was the source of their livelihood as well as the means to increase their prestige as servants of the sanctuary. The Quran has also referred to the fact in the Surah Quraish. So let them worship the Lord of this house, who hath fed them against hunger, hath made safe from fear. Quran 106:3-5. In other words, they were inclined to avoid a scramble unless their tribal or religious honor was in peril. They were thus committed to the principle of peaceful coexistence. Nevertheless, they possessed considerable military prowess. Their courage and intrepidity was as axiomatic throughout Arabia as was their skill in horsemanship. Al-Ghadbata al-Madriya, or anger of the Madar, which can be described as a tormenting thirst quenched by nothing save blood, was a well-known adage of Arabic language frequently used by the poets and orators of pre-Islamic Arabia. The military prowess of Quraysh was not restricted to their own tribal reserves alone. They utilized the services of Ahabish or the desert Arabs living around Mecca, some of which traced their descent to Kinana and Khuzaymah bin Madraka, the distant relation of Quraysh. The Khuzai were also confederates of the Quraysh. In addition, Mecca had always had slaves in considerable numbers who were ever willing to fight for their masters. They could thus draft, at any time, several thousand warriors under their banner. The strongest force, numbering 10,000 combatants, ever mustered in the pre-Islamic era, was enlisted by the Quraysh in the Battle of Azab. Mecca, the heart of Arabia. By virtue of its being the seat of the national shrine and the most flourishing commercial center whose inhabitants were culturally and intellectually in Arabia. It was considered a rival of Sana'a in Yemen, but with the Abyssinians and Iranians gaining control over Sana'a, one after another, and the decline of the earlier glamour of Hira and Ghassan, Mecca had attained a place of undisputed supremacy in Arabia.
The moral life. A moral ideal was what the Meccans lacked most of all, or one can say, except for the binding force of some stale customs and traditional sentiments of Arab chivalry, they had no code of ethics to guide their conduct. Gambling was a favorite pastime in which they took pride. Unrestrained drunkenness sent them into rapturous delight, and immoderate dissipation satisfied their perverted sense of honor. Their gatherings were the scenes of drinking bouts and wanton debauchery without any idea of sin or crime. They never took any aversion to wickedness, iniquity, callousness, and brigandage. The moral atmosphere of Arabia in general and of Mecca in particular was faithfully depicted by Ja'far bin Abu Talib, a prominent member of the Quraysh, in the court of Negus, when he said to him, "O king, we were an unenlightened people plunged in ignorance, we worshipped idols, we ate dead animals, and we committed abominations, we broke natural ties, we ill-treated our neighbors, and our strong devoured the weak." Religious life. The religious practices and beliefs of the Arabs were, beyond doubt, even more despicable, particularly, by reason of the influence they exerted on the social and moral life of the people. Having lost all but little touch with the salubrious teachings of the prophets of old, they had been completely submerged in the crude and materialistic form of fetishism like that prevailing in the countries surrounding them. So fond had they become of idol worship that no less than 360 deities adorned, or defiled, the holy sanctuary. The greatest amongst these gods was Hubal, whom Abu Sufyan had extolled at the battle of Uhud when he had cried out, "Glory be to Hubal." The idol occupied a central place in the Kaaba, by the side of a well in which the offerings were stored. Sculptured in the shape of a man, it was made of a huge cornelian rock. As its right hand was missing when the Quraysh had discovered it, they had replaced it by a hand made of solid gold. Two idols had been placed in front of the Kaaba, one was called Isaf and the other as Na'ilah. The former had been installed close to the Kaaba and the latter by the place of Zamzam. After some time the Quraysh had shifted the first one near the other, where they offered up sacrifices besides them. On the mounts of Safa and Marwa, there were two more idols called Nahik Mujawid al-Arih and Mudai Mater. Every household in Mecca had an idol which was worshipped by the inmates of the house. Al-Uzza had been installed near Arafat within a temple constructed for it. Quraysh venerated Al-Uzza as the chief or the noblest of all deities. The Arabs used to cast lots with the help of divining arrows placed before these idols for taking a decision to commence any affair. There were also other idols, one of which, named as Al-Khalsa, had been set up in the depression of Mecca's valley. The idol was garlanded, presented an offering of barley and wheat and bathed with milk. The Arabs used to make sacrifices and hang the eggs of an ostrich over it. Being a popular deity, its replicas were sold by vendors to the villagers and pilgrims visiting Mecca. The Arabs possessed the virtues of courage, loyalty, and generosity, but during the long night of superstition and ignorance, worship of images and idols had stolen into their hearts, perhaps, more firmly than any other nation, and they had wandered far away from the simple faith of their ancestors Ibrahim and Ismail, which had once taught them the true meaning of religious piety, purity of morals, and seemliness of conduct. So, this was the city of Mecca. Then by the middle of the 6th century of Christian era, before the birth of the Prophet, whence we see Islam rising on a horizon shrouded in obscure darkness. In very truth the Lord has said, That you may warn a folk whose fathers were not warned, so they are heedless. Quran 36, 6.